while Israel and the United States with Steve Witkoff and Hamas were trying to negotiate either a ceasefire or the release of the hostages or both, hopefully to get to an end of that war, all of a sudden, out of nowhere in Qatar, who was acting as an independent mediator, Israel launched an attempted assassination against the delegation, the negotiators for Hamas, who were trying to reach a negotiated settlement to get the hostages released. What is your, and I've got some comments from some of the people who've been involved with this, but I just kind of want your off-the-cuff observations of what does this do to the, I guess, the state of diplomacy in the Middle East?
Well, it is an Exocet missile in that whole diplomatic enterprise. There's just no question about that. But this is hardly surprising. It's very important to understand that Benjamin Netanyahu and the Israeli government, they're not interested in a ceasefire. They're not interested in a negotiated settlement to the Gaza genocide. What Netanyahu wants to do is he wants to ethnically cleanse all of Gaza. He wants to drive all of the Palestinians out. And he does not want a ceasefire. He does not want some sort of agreement that leaves the Palestinians in Gaza. As you well know, he's now trying to raise Gaza City. He's trying to drive the remaining Palestinians in northern Gaza down into this giant concentration camp that they've created for the Palestinians in southern Gaza. And then once they're all corralled in this concentration camp, they'll murder them or create circumstances where they can drive them into Egypt or into another country. But that's what Netanyahu wants. And what happened in Doha is that Netanyahu struck with the thought in mind that this would be a fatal blow to any future negotiations. After all, he was talking about killing the negotiators. How can you negotiate if you kill the negotiators?
Well, I mean, that's the operative question. And one might, I would say one might hope that the U.S. would be aggravated about that Trump would be upset because, for crying out loud, he had his guy, Steve Witkoff, in the process of negotiating with those very Hamas people and Qatar to try and find a way out of this. And all of a sudden, here this thing gets blown up. Now, you wouldn't think that, though, if you listen to Trump's golfing buddy, Lindsey Graham.
Number one, President Trump has been great supporting Israel. He's the best friend Israel's ever had in the White House. I understand what they're saying about Qatar. We have 10,000 troops there. But here's my take. 48 hours ago, President Trump issued an ultimatum to Hamas. This is your last chance. So what did Israel do? 48 hours after the ultimatum, they took them down. What did these people have in common who died in Qatar? They all had their fingerprints on planning October the 7th or cheerleading October the 7th. When we killed bin Laden in Pakistan, we didn't call Pakistan. We had nothing to apologize for. Israel has nothing to apologize for. Hamas has been giving every opportunity to lay down their weapons and leave and have sanctuary. They choose to fight. They choose to destroy their own people. I don't blame Israel one bit.
I mean, it's hard to even comment on that because he's saying he's implying here that Trump was actually part of this. And in fact, Gary, if you can pull up that Truth Social from Trump, 2 days before this, Trump claimed in here, he said, everyone wants the hostages home. Everybody wants the war to end. The Israelis have accepted my terms, and it is time for Hamas. I have warned Hamas about the consequences of not accepting. This is my last warning. There will not be another one. And then 2 days later, this happens. Now, certainly gives room for the impression that the negotiations were all a ruse to lure the Hamas negotiators into a place where they would be known and then attacked by Israel. What do you make of that?
Well, first of all, those were not his terms. The Israelis dictate the terms and Trump delivers them. Trump is basically a prisoner of the Israelis. I like to say that the two of them are joined at the hip, but it's the Israelis who really drive the train here. And we got a set of parameters from the Israelis. We delivered those parameters to Hamas. And Hamas was meeting for the purpose of negotiating with the United States. It's, in my opinion, unthinkable to kill the negotiators. I mean, if you go back to the Vietnam War, would we have thought about, attacking the North Vietnamese negotiators in Paris? No. I mean, nobody even talked about that. When you're at war with another country, or another group, what you do is you have negotiations and you don't kill the negotiators. It's just something you don't do. And it looks like in this case, Trump didn't know that the Israelis were going to try to kill the negotiators. But I think it's quite clear that the Israelis had to get permission from us beforehand because they were going into Qatar, and we have a huge air base in Qatar, and we have all sorts of ways of picking up the fact that they're attacking into Qatar. So I think the Israelis surely alerted us to the fact that they were going to strike in Doha, and but we gave them the green light. It had to be the case. We clearly didn't tell them that they couldn't do it. But I don't think that Trump was in cahoots with the Israelis in setting up the Hamas negotiators for the kill.
Well, Trump may not have been in cahoots, but Israel most assuredly was, because here was the Israeli foreign minister the day before the attack talking about how the war could come to an end in one day if the negotiations work.
The war in Gaza, my friend, can end tomorrow. President Trump said it clearly yesterday. Israel said yes to his proposal. We are ready to accept a full deal that would end the war based on the cabinet decision.
And yet we know that, I mean, they were already in the final planning, and just hours later, less than 24 hours later, they launched this attempted assassination, which, quite unlike Israeli actions in the past, didn't actually succeed. But I mean, what does this tell you about the state of diplomacy? I think you alluded to this at the first, but I mean, this seems to be a pretty dark situation here, which now makes any future negotiations on almost anything associated with Israel or the United States, who's going to listen to us?
Well, Danny, first of all, what's happening in Gaza, as I said, is that the Israelis are trying to drive all the Palestinians out, and they're not interested in diplomacy. They say they are, and of course the Western media basically plays along with the Israelis, and there's all this talk about diplomacy. But the Israelis are executing a genocide in Gaza. And of course, the mainstream media never uses that word to describe what they're doing, doesn't even refer to it as mass murder. And they're doing this, they're executing this genocide in pursuit of ethnic cleansing. They want to drive the Palestinians out of Gaza, and they eventually want to drive the Palestinians out of the West Bank. All you have to do is look at what they're doing. It's perfectly obvious. And furthermore, the more right-wing members of the government say that explicitly. It's no great secret. It's not something that I'm making up. So what the Israelis did in Qatar with their attack on the Hamas negotiators is hardly surprising. And furthermore, it's hardly surprising because they can get away with it because the United States will protect them no matter what they do. We give them unconditional support. So the Israelis are free to roam around the Middle East. They're attacking Lebanon, they're attacking Syria, they're attacking Yemen, they're threatening to attack Iran again. They attacked Qatar. I mean, this is just the way they operate. And what does the United States do? The United States supports them. Now, I think President Trump would like to work out some sort of deal to put an end to the Gaza genocide. But that would involve getting tough with the Israelis because the Israelis don't want to end the genocide. They want to drive all the Palestinians out. So the question is, when push comes to shove, who wins, Trump or Netanyahu? And the answer is that Netanyahu wins. And then this brings us to the question that you ask. Can you trust the Israelis? Absolutely not. Who in their right mind would ever trust the Israelis? And can you trust the Americans? Absolutely not.
And you, speaking of Benjamin Netanyahu, so I haven't seen this on any mainstream news outlet, and I'm certain we won't, but we will here. And so I just played you that comment from the day before of the Israeli foreign minister talking about a negotiated settlement, that Hamas can end the war in just tomorrow if only they'll accede to the terms, et cetera, that were set out there. Then you have, in the aftermath of the attack, you have Benjamin Netanyahu, who here is going to tell you that it's going to ignore like that never happened, that there was no negotiations. And instead, this is almost like October 9th or something, like right after 10/7, and that they're going after the perpetrators of this attack. Note the change here.
We went after the terrorist masterminds who committed the October 7th massacre. And we did so in Qatar, which gives safe haven. It harbors terrorists. It finances Hamas. It gives its terrorist chieftains sumptuous villas. It gives them everything. So we did exactly what America did when it went after the terrorists, the Al-Qaeda terrorists in Afghanistan, and after they went and killed Osama bin Laden in Pakistan. Now the various countries of the world condemn Israel. They should be ashamed of themselves. What did they do after America took out Osama bin Laden? Did they say, oh, what a terrible thing was done to Afghanistan or to Pakistan? No, they applauded. They should applaud Israel for standing and up to these same principles and carrying them out. And I say to Qatar and all nations who harbor terrorists, you either expel them or you bring them to justice. Because if you don't, we will.
So he is as bold and as brash and as in your face as it can be. And one other thing that I'm going to point out, even before I get your comments here, is he condemned Qatar for harboring terrorists and actually supporting Hamas, oblivious to the fact that even the New York Times very clearly says that Benjamin Netanyahu has been supporting Hamas for years prior to this. And much of that money was funneled through Qatar because they helped them out. Now he wants to pretend like that he's, umbraged, that how dare they support terrorists, etc., when they were hosting the negotiations that his foreign minister set up. What do you say to all that?
Well, there is no question that before October 7th, Benjamin Netanyahu was working with Hamas and Qatar to keep a lid on Gaza. There's no question about that. Benjamin Netanyahu preferred to keep Hamas alive inside of Gaza because Hamas was not interested in a two-state solution. Benjamin Netanyahu lived in fear of the Palestinian Authority under Mahmoud Abbas because Abbas was interested in a two-state solution. And Netanyahu does not want a two-state solution. So he worked instead, Netanyahu, with Hamas, and they worked through Qatar. So what he's now saying sounds like extreme hypocrisy, which is what we would expect. Another point I would make here, Danny, is that killing Osama bin Laden is a lot different than killing negotiators. We had negotiations taking place in Doha. Those negotiators were recognized by the United States. The United States was working with those negotiators. Steve Witkoff, in particular, was working with those Hamas negotiators. And the Israelis were as well. And what happened here is not like killing Osama bin Laden, it's killing the negotiators for the other side. The final point I would make is the use of the term terrorist is a term I do not like at all, because it's just a way of smearing the other side. And calling Hamas terrorists, I think, is wrongheaded. They are basically freedom fighters. You can disagree with what they're fighting for, but they want their land back. They want their homes back. They believe that the Israelis stole their homes, stole their land from them, and they want it back. They're a resistance movement. And calling them terrorists is just a way of delegitimizing them and making it possible to do almost anything you want against them because you're portraying them, in effect, as the font of all evil.
And I'm just curious, what do you say to those people who would push back on that and say, well, look what they did to that bus a couple of days ago, two Palestinian gunmen who killed a bunch of people in Israel in retaliation for what's been going on. How does that fit into the freedom fighter part?
I think freedom fighters and states sometimes engage in acts of terrorism. And I'm not condoning those acts of terrorism, but to just simply call them terrorists, would you want to call Israel a terrorist state? If we call Hamas terrorists, why don't we call Israel a terrorist state? We don't call Israel a terrorist state, although Israel is killing huge numbers of civilians and has been killing huge numbers of civilians for a long period of time. In fact, they're executing a genocide in Gaza, but we don't call Israel a terrorist state. We call any resistance movement that we don't like terrorists, right? And that's, a way of winning the propaganda war. Again, you don't have to like what Hamas represents. And I can understand why Israel and its supporters don't want to call Hamas a freedom fighter organization. But the fact is, they are freedom fighters. They're people who are fighting to get land that once belonged to them back. They believe the Israelis stole that land from them and they want it back. And there's no question that they sometimes engage in terrorism, but I would not call them a terrorist organization any more than I would call Israel a terrorist state.
It's one thing if the United States is either turning a blind eye or even cooperating with Israel and destroying diplomatic norms, but then there may be some consequence to this buildup. And in light of the fact that Turkey has suspended economic relations with Israel, Spain has an arms embargo on it. So there's actually some actions being taken. France and UK are apparently about to formally recognize the Palestinian state. And then this morning, just hours ago, actually, there was finally a comment from Mohammed bin Salman from the Saudi Arabia about this attack on Qatar, and it's pretty strong.
We reject and condemn the Israeli authorities' aggressions in the region, most recently the brutal assault on the brotherly state of Qatar. This attack requires an Arab, Islamic, and international response to confront such aggression and to take international measures to stop the occupying power and deter its criminal practices aimed at destabilizing the security and stability of the region. We stand fully with the state of Qatar in whatever measures it takes, without limit, and we will dedicate all our capabilities to this cause.
So what do you make of that statement there, especially saying that whatever Qatar does, no matter what, with no limits, we will support it? What might that mean?
Talk is cheap. Right? Let's see what they do. Saudi Arabia has an Abraham Accord. The United Arab Emirates, it has an Abraham Accord. Let's see both of those countries put an end to the Abraham Accord. I mean, talk is cheap. This is what you get from the Europeans. They talk. Nobody does anything here. How long has this genocide been going on? And what have these people done? What has Saudi Arabia done?
And let's look at that. What does Saudi Arabia have to gain by keeping the Abraham Accords in place as opposed to tearing it up? What are the pros and cons or the cost for Saudi Arabia to do that?
Well, I think that Saudi Arabia wants to have good relations with the United States. And I think the Abraham Accord that it has with Israel is a step in that direction. I think the Saudis genuinely want to have good relations with Israel. I think the Saudis have long been willing to accept an Israel in the Middle East. They've long promoted a two-state solution to the problem. And I think the Saudis at this point in time don't have other countries that they can really turn to provide security for them the way the United States can. So that is what I think explains why the Saudis have the Abraham Accord. And I think the same thing is true for the UAE. But I think if the Saudis and the UAE were to say to the United States and to Israel, the Abraham Accord or the Abraham Accords that we have with Israel are finished. It's just over with, given Israeli behavior. I think that it would work to their advantage over the long term. I think Saudi Arabia has a certain amount of leverage over the United States. The United States needs Saudi Arabia. And this will be increasingly true as we move forward because China is becoming a more and more influential player in the Middle East. And countries like Saudi Arabia have been moving toward China over time. And this is not something that makes the United States happy. So the Saudis have some leverage. But again, are they going to do that? Are they going to put an end to the Abraham Accord? I doubt it.
Saudi Arabia is not actually a formal member of the Abraham Accords. I know that's what they're trying to get, and maybe that's part of the issue is that Trump really wants that to happen because he wants the credit for expanding the Abraham Accords, etc. Israel has been trying to get that, but
yeah,
then
you're right. My apologies, Danny. My brain slipped out of gear. Right, Saudi Arabia doesn't have an Abraham Accord. It's the UAE that has it.
And lastly, what about Qatar? I mean, other than voicing outrage, talking, as you say, is there any practical actions that they can take as a result of this?
It's hard to see what they can do. They're not going to throw the Americans out of that airbase that they have in Qatar. I don't see what kind of leverage they have.
Well, and that's part of the problem then, is that you get Israel with these, I mean, they already blew up a diplomatic compound in 2024 in Syria. virtually no expert or external consequence of that. They're doing this genocide, as you point out there. They are systematically wiping the country or the territory of Gaza literally to dust to drive the people out. And now then here they attack into Qatar, and there doesn't seem to ever be any consequence to it. Ergo, as you just saw with Benjamin Netanyahu, this incredibly in-your-face bold statement, I think we can expect this to continue on. How do you see it?
I think we can expect it to continue on. I mean, there's no reason to think that anything is going to change.
Is there a line beyond which Israel could ever go that there would be consequences in the region, that somebody would take action more than what Turkey has already?
Well, there's a genocide taking place in Gaza. What more can you do besides execute a genocide against the Palestinians in Gaza? I mean, I'm not sure what the Israelis could do. One might argue that the cumulative effect of continuing this genocide will reach the point where the Israelis have to back off. You can make that argument, but I don't see any evidence that that's happening. As you pointed out, the French and the British are talking about recognizing a Palestinian state this month. And there's all sorts of other movement in countries around the world where they express their anger at what Israel is doing. But it really doesn't add up to much. And as I said at the top of the show, the United States protects them at every turn. So the Israelis understand that if they do get into trouble, the United States will come to the rescue. You know, with regard to both France and Britain, the United States is working overtime to prevent France and Britain from recognizing a Palestinian state. And this is just evidence of how the United States covers for Israel at every turn.
Well, with that kind of pressure, and I mean, if we were ever going to do anything, the genocide alone should be enough, as you pointed out. And whether we were in direct coordination and cahoots with Israel in this attack or not, we clearly didn't take any action after the fact, even though it was a complete destruction of the normal diplomatic realm. So I think I can't disagree with you. It looks like that we'll continue to give diplomatic backing and covering, and that people will continue to die until some point when, I don't know, I guess the end finally arrives. Some threshold is crossed. We can only hope so for the people of Palestine.
Although it's hard to define what that threshold would be. As I say, what is the threshold beyond genocide that would cause the United States and other countries to crack down on Israel?